More on this, we can cross to London and speak with Grégoire Roos, Director of the Europe and Russia and Eurasia programs at Chatham House. Grégoire, thank you so much for joining us today. So as we've been reporting, it's a very subdued victory parade in Moscow. Some other events were canceled in other cities. How will ordinary Russians view these scaled-down festivities?
Well, thank you for having me. It's true that today there was no major mechanized column. You had fewer heavy systems, obviously tighter security, internet shutdowns that have played quite a role in watering down the mood throughout Russia, and especially, of course, big cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg. And on the whole, I think an atmosphere closer to a kind of wartime protection than what one would call a triumphal sort of celebration. But I think what matters the most for Russians at the moment is the state of the economy, the rising number of bankruptcies, the stalling purchasing power, and obviously the internet shutdowns that have made much more challenging for them to communicate between one another and enjoy the free internet the way they actually did until the last few months.
Now, Grégoire, you bring up those internet shutdowns. I want to talk a little bit about this article that ran in the Financial Times talking about President Putin's growing paranoia, his spending more time in bunkers, sort of being isolated from ordinary Russians. At this point, does he still have the public's support?
The answer is yes. I mean, there have been polls, both independent and Russian polls. So, of course, those are not compared with what you would have in Europe, like YouGov and others throughout the EU. But I think it is telling in the sense that the approval ratings of Vladimir Putin have fallen by 10 points, which is quite significant. In some polls, up to 10 points, which is significant, but it's still way above 50, 55, 60%. So, and if we look at the polls regarding the support of the Russian population for the war in Ukraine, it is still an overwhelming support for the war. So I think it matters to zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture. There still is support for the Russian president at this stage. I don't expect to see millions of Russians taking to the streets, so far from that. But it is true that it is not, let's say, some decisions from the government are being questioned, and in particular the crackdown on the internet. But it does not mean that the Russian president, at least today, has lost the support of his people.
Now, Grégoire, we heard just there Putin denouncing NATO in his remarks during his Victory Day speech. There is this 3-day ceasefire that President Trump has managed to broker to cover this period. Now, he had said he hoped it would be extended. Russian officials have poured cold water on that, saying it's only meant to be these 3 days. So at this point, where are we with negotiations? Is there any possibility of face-to-face talks happening, or is that just a long way off?
Well, we have been talking a lot about face-to-face meetings between President Zelensky and President Putin. President Zelensky has repeatedly said that he stood ready to meet with President Putin, possibly in Turkey, and President Erdogan, for that matter, has repeatedly said that he was very keen and stood ready to host such an encounter. But for now, the Russian president has constantly found the right argument to decline the invitation, or at the last moment to say, sorry, but I cannot make it. But of course, the Ukrainian president is more than welcome to travel to Moscow, which is obviously not something that President Zelensky would do. So at this stage, it's very difficult to see or to look at the 3-day ceasefire, to look at it for more than what it is, a 3-day ceasefire. And I think it will be telling to whether the ceasefire is breached or not Today, possibly unlikely so, but tomorrow, let's see. It remains to be seen. I mean, the Easter ceasefire itself was breached a few times. So I think that unfortunately, it's unlikely that this will be a trend about to be sustained. And I don't see a longer term ceasefire at this stage. And of course, the US president has other priorities at the moment in terms of negotiations. He is looking rather more to the east and the south.
Yes. So, Grégoire, the reason for the ceasefire was certainly concern that Ukraine was going to strike during the parade today. Ukraine has shown that they can send their drones, long range into Russia. So how worried is President Putin and his advisors? How worried are they about Ukraine's ability to carry out deep strikes?
Very worried. They are very worried indeed. I think that is perhaps the most important question, and the real issue in this Victory Day parade being watered down is not so much that you have fewer fewer troops and less military equipment. It's that it has heightened the level of fear, of concerns, and quite frankly of paranoia of the Russian president. I think in the Financial Times article you referred to earlier, the threat of a coup is, in my opinion, way overstated. That it's something that is exaggerated. There might have been discussions about whether the country was on the right track, but we're far from a coup. When it comes, however, to the risks of the Ukrainians targeting strategic positions and the Russian president where he and actually his family find themselves,
Yes.
the paranoia is there. And that's the reason why the president is actually spending most of his time in his bunker. And each
Yes.
time you see him visiting positions, most of the time those are pre-recorded videos.
Yes. Thank you so much, Grégoire, for sharing your insights with us today on the program. That's Grégoire Roos,
My pleasure.
Director of the Europe and Russia and Eurasia programs at Chatham House.